My dad called me the weight everyone has to carry. I said nothing and left overnight. Funny how once the weight was gone, the entire family completely drowned in debts and unpaid bills. I was 28, sitting at the same dinner table I'd sat at every year since I was a kid, staring at a plate of dried turkey and lukewarm mashed potatoes, trying not to make eye contact with my father. I wasn't expecting the night to be good, but I never expected him to look around the table, laugh, and call me dead weight in front of everyone. That's not even the worst part. The worst part is that no one stopped him. My name's Zach, and I guess you could say I've always been the odd one out in my family. I'm the youngest of three. My sister Rachel is 35, and my brother Dean is 33. Growing up, our house wasn't abusive exactly, but it was rigid structured. My dad ran it like a CEO runs a company, and we were the unpaid interns constantly trying not to get fired. Rachel learned early how to suck up. She was the golden child, always in control, never out of place. Dean played the part of the golden boy star athlete dad's shadow. And me, I was the quiet one, the creative one. The one who didn't want to go into business or finance or whatever blueprint my dad had drawn up for my future before I even hit puberty. Instead, I liked art. I liked building things, sketching, designing. I got into 3D animation in high school and eventually pursued it as a career. Not exactly what my father would call real work. He never said it directly. Not back then at least, but it was obvious. He'd smile politely when I mentioned a new project, then immediately pivot the conversation to Dean's promotion or Rachel's new condo. My wins weren't wins to him. They were distractions, hobbies, and somewhere along the line, the rest of the family started treating me the same way. By the time I hit my mid-20s, I had distanced myself a lot. I still showed up for the major holidays, partly out of guilt, partly out of hope that maybe something had changed. Spoiler, it hadn't. The comments were always subtle, but stacked. My mom would ask if I was still doing those little videos, like I was a teenager messing around on a laptop. Rachel would tell me I should think about getting a real job before it's too late. Dean would just laugh and say nothing, like I was a joke he didn't even need to tell. But this year was different. This year something had shifted in me, not them. I'd actually had a huge win, a personal one. I'd finally signed a long-term contract with a major studio to work on a streaming series. It was the kind of job that paid better than anything my siblings were doing. Even if I didn't wear a suit or sit in an office, it wasn't flashy or viral, so I hadn't posted about it on social media. I thought maybe I'd share the news in person. Let them see that I wasn't some starving artist drifting through life. I figured maybe, just maybe, they'd be proud. So I showed up to Christmas dinner feeling something I hadn't felt in years around my family. Confidence. My mom greeted me at the door with her usual tight hug and that look that screamed, "I was worried you wouldn't come." Dean barely looked up from his phone. Rachel gave me the air kiss she reserved for people she didn't want to wrinkle her makeup for. My dad didn't even come to the door. He was already seated at the table with a glass of scotch and the look of a man who thought he was doing us all a favor just by showing up. The dinner started like they always do. My mom asked if I was dating anyone. I wasn't. Dean talked about crypto. Rachel brought her boyfriend Carter, who may as well have been a mirror of my dad in a slightly younger body. And the two of them immediately launched into a conversation about real estate. No one asked about me, not once. I waited. I thought maybe after dessert I'd bring it up. Maybe when things had calmed down and people were less performative. But then my dad cleared his throat and raised his glass for a toast, and everything went sideways. "I just want to say," he began, "how proud I am of my kids. Rachel just closed her biggest deal yet. Dean's company is expanding, and it's great to see hard work pay off." He paused, smirking, looking around the table. Then he added, "And Zach's here too, still floating along, dead weight. But we love him." It was said like a joke. The kind of thing you're supposed to laugh at to make it less sharp. But no one laughed. Not really. Rachel gave a polite chuckle. Dean snorted. My mom froze with her fork halfway to her mouth. Carter grinned like it was the funniest thing he'd heard all day. And I just sat there. I didn't laugh. I didn't argue. I didn't even flinch. I just let it sit. Let them all marinate in the moment they didn't expect to matter, because that's what they'd always done. Say cruel things and expect you to play along. Laugh it off. Swallow it whole. But this time, I wasn't going to. Instead, I asked one question. A single sentence that I swear made the air leave the room. My mom dropped her fork. Rachel's smile cracked. Dean actually looked up from his phone for the first time all night. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't make a scene. I just looked at my father and asked the one thing none of them were ready for. I didn't even raise my voice. Just looked. My father straight in the eye, leaned back in my chair and asked, "Who paid the mortgage in 2009 when you got laid off?" The reaction was immediate. My mother's fork clattered to her plate. Rachel froze mid-sip of wine, her glass hovering in the air like a freeze frame from a sitcom. Dean's head jerked up like someone had slapped him. My father blinked once, then again his mouth opened slightly, then closed. For a moment, all I could hear was the hum of the dishwasher running in the kitchen and the soft Christmas jazz spilling from the Bluetooth speaker in the living room. No one said a word. See, they all remembered 2009. It was one of the worst years for our family financially. My dad got laid off from his managerial job at a regional supply company, and my mom's part-time work as a paralegal wasn't enough to keep the bills paid. Rachel was still in grad school at the time, fully funded by my parents, of course. Dean had just started working at a tech startup, but he was barely making rent. No one in the family had money to spare. No one except me. At the time, I was 21, a junior in college, and I just sold the rights to a short animated film I'd made during an internship. It didn't go viral or make headlines, but it got picked up by an indie platform for a licensing fee that for me felt like winning the lottery. I wasn't rich, not by any means. But I had enough to help. So I did quietly, without fanfare, without asking for anything in return. I wrote checks when the mortgage was late, covered the electricity bills, paid for groceries. My name wasn't on any documents. My dad never acknowledged it out loud, but they all knew. And now, years later, with his scotch glass raised and his smug grin in place, he called me dead weight in front of the people who should have known better. I didn't need to say anything else. The question alone was enough to fracture something in that perfectly controlled narrative my father liked to keep tight-fisted over our family. He tried to recover, cleared his throat. "That was years ago," he said gruffly, like that somehow erased it. "You were just trying to help." "Yeah," I said, "because you asked." He flinched just slightly, but I saw it. So did everyone else. And I think that's when the balance in the room shifted, like the floor had tilted just a few degrees and no one was sure where to put their feet. The conversation stuttered back to life after that, but the energy had changed. My mom barely touched her food. Rachel suddenly became very interested in her phone. Dean kept giving me sidelong glances like I'd grown a second head. No one asked about my work. No one congratulated me on my success because at that point it was obvious I'd come into that house with something they didn't expect. Leverage, but I didn't press it. I let the silence do the work for me. Sometimes truth lands heavier when you don't shove it down people's throats. The rest of dinner passed in a weird daze. After dessert, I helped my mom clear the table. She was quiet, her mouth tight, but her hands were trembling. As I handed her a stack of plates, she whispered, "You shouldn't have said that in front of everyone." I looked at her, said, "What the truth?" Her eyes flicked to the dining room. "You know how your father is?" "Yeah," I said. "That's the problem." She didn't respond. Just took the plates and turned toward the kitchen. After that night, things got colder. Over the next few weeks, I got fewer texts from my mom. No calls. Rachel unfollowed me on Instagram, which was her digital way of slamming a door. Dean sent me one half-hearted message asking if I was okay. But when I replied with a simple, "Doing better than ever," he never answered. Then came Easter. By then, I'd mostly moved on. I wasn't expecting an apology, but I also wasn't expecting what came next. I showed up because despite everything, I still wanted to give them a chance. I guess I still believed in the idea of family, even if it kept letting me down. When I arrived, it was obvious I wasn't really welcome. No one had saved me a seat. There was no plate set for me. My mom blinked in surprise like she hadn't expected me to come. Rachel and Dean were already deep in conversation with my dad. All of them sipping wine and laughing about something that stopped the moment I walked in. My mom quickly grabbed a spare chair and muttered, "Oh, we didn't think you were coming." "Why wouldn't I?" I asked. She didn't answer. I sat at the edge of the table like an afterthought, trying to stay civil, trying to ignore the weird tension. But it didn't take long for the conversation to turn against me again. "So Zach," Rachel said, her voice is shade too bright, "still playing around with cartoons?" I smiled. "Still animating." "Yeah, working on a couple episodes for a new series." "Oh, that's nice," she said, like I'd told her I was working at a smoothie shop. "Must be nice not to have to worry about the real world." I blinked. "You mean paying rent and bills and taxes?" She waved it off. "You know what I mean?" And just like that, it was happening again. Same script, different holiday. Dean joined in, this time saying something about freelancers being allergic to real structure. My dad laughed. My mom said nothing. And I realized for the first time that they weren't going to change, not because they couldn't, but because they didn't have to. Because they had each other, and I didn't. Then the real blow came. My dad clinked his glass and announced that Rachel and Carter were expecting a baby. Everyone gasped and celebrated. Hugs. Cheers, tears. I smiled, congratulated her, genuinely happy for her. And then she said, "We're thinking of naming him after Dad or maybe Dean. You know, strong names." And my mom, my own mother, added with a chuckle, "Well, at least we know this baby won't end up living in Fantasyland." They all laughed loud and long. No one looked at me. No one cared how it landed. That's when I realized this wasn't just about respect. This was about erasure. They wanted to pretend I was never the one who held them up when they were sinking. They wanted to rewrite the past so they could keep justifying their version of who I was. The soft one, the dreamer, the useless one. But they'd gone too far. A few days later, I got a text from my mom. She said she was planning a surprise party for my dad's 60th birthday that summer and hoped I could put together one of your little videos as a gift. I stared at the message for a long time, not because I was surprised, but because of how casually cruel it was. That's when the idea hit me. Not out of anger, not out of spite, but out of something colder, sharper. If they wanted to rewrite history, fine. I'd let them. But I'd write the ending. Because here's the thing they didn't know. I wasn't just some freelance artist anymore. I had access to tools they couldn't even pronounce. I had time, skill, and receipts. I had emails, screenshots, old checks, and most importantly, I had the full, unvarnished truth. So I smiled, texted my mom back, and said I'd love to help with that. I'll make it something he'll never forget. And I meant it. I didn't respond to that text right away. I told myself I needed time to plan the video. But really, I just needed space to breathe, to think, to make sure I wasn't acting out of pure emotion. Because for a while, that's all I was angry. I mean, how could I not be? They erased me. I sat there for a long time after that Easter dinner, just scrolling through photos on my phone. Pictures from years back. Old family barbecues, birthdays, school ceremonies. In every single one, I was off to the side. Not smiling, not frowning, just there, like an afterthought, like a prop. Someone forgot to move out of the shot. And the more I looked, the more I realized I'd spent most of my life shrinking myself to fit into the space they'd carved out for me. A role they never intended to be big enough for who I actually was. But that role, I was done playing it. I didn't explode, didn't send a dramatic text or make a public announcement. I didn't even call my mom back. I just stepped away quietly, intentionally, and for the first time in my life, I stopped asking what they thought of me. Stopped waiting for their approval like it was some kind of prize I hadn't yet earned. And that was the beginning. The next few months were weird, lonely in some ways, freeing in others. I stopped replying to the family group chat, stopped checking Instagram to see if Rachel had relented and followed me back. She hadn't. When my mom sent occasional hope, "You're doing okay" messages, I kept my replies brief, polite, distant, she noticed. Eventually, the messages slowed to a trickle. But while my ties to them loosened, I started anchoring myself to something else. My work, that animation contract I mentioned, it blew up in a good way. I poured everything I had into it. Late nights, early mornings, weekends, spent refining keyframes and building out emotional beats for characters that ironically felt more real to me than the people I shared a last name with. My work became my therapy. Every scene I completed felt like I was gluing back pieces of myself that had been chipped away for years, and people noticed. The show launched on a major platform. Critics called it visually stunning and emotionally resonant. A clip from one of the episodes went viral on TikTok, and suddenly I was being flooded with messages, people telling me how much the story meant to them, how much the characters reminded them of themselves. One person wrote, "It's like you crawled inside my head and animated my childhood." That hit me hard because for the first time in my life, I wasn't just seen. I was understood. Not by my family, not by people I'd known since I was 5, but by strangers. Strangers who didn't care what school I went to or whether I wore a suit. They only cared about what I made, what I gave the world. And that was enough. I got invited to speak on a panel at a major animation expo that summer. Flew out to LA, stayed in a decent hotel for once instead of crashing on a friend's couch. I stood on a stage with creators I'd admired since high school and talked about visual storytelling and using trauma as a lens for art. The moderator asked me what inspired the emotional tone of the show. I said family and left it at that. But even as things were going well, I'd be lying if I said I never thought about them. About my dad's face when I asked that question. About my mom looking down at her plate like she wanted to disappear. about the weird, empty feeling of knowing that my success meant nothing to the people who should have cared most. There were moments, quiet ones between edits or before bed, where the doubt crept in. Where I wondered if I was being petty, if I was the one turning cold, if maybe I'd misunderstood things all along. But then I'd remember the dinner, the laugh, the way my mom had said, "At least this baby won't end up in fantasy land," like my entire existence was a joke to her and that would snap me out of it. They hadn't just dismissed my work, they dismissed me over and over again, so I kept building. With the success of the show, I started getting offers, bigger projects, feature-length gigs, even a few requests from studios I dreamed about working with. I signed with a rep, got legal advice, built a team. Suddenly, I wasn't just doing little videos. I was running my own small production studio. I hired 2 assistants, contracted a few freelancers, started mentoring a kid from my hometown who reminded me of myself at 16. And the best part, I didn't tell my family any of it. Let them think I was still tinkering in my bedroom like a bored teenager. Let them keep underestimating me. That was the best camouflage I could ask for until the text came in. Late June. My mom, "Hey Zach, just a reminder about Dad's surprise 60th July 15th. Hope you're still working on that little video. Let me know if you need help with photos." I stared at it for a long time, smiled, set my phone down, and opened a folder I'd been quietly building for months. See, when I'd agreed to make that video, I already knew what I was going to do. But I didn't want it to be a petty gotcha moment. I wanted it to mean something, to land with enough weight that no one could shrug it off as a tantrum. I wanted to hold a mirror up to my family and let them see exactly who they were, who they'd been all along, without me needing to say a single word. So I went back through old footage, home videos, birthday tapes, random clips my mom had sent over the years. I pulled everything into my editing software and started weaving a narrative not of my dad's accomplishments or his 60 years of wisdom, but of the people around him, of the sacrifices made, of the moments they ignored. I found a clip from 2009. My mom sitting on the porch with a worried look on her face, my voice off camera saying, "It's okay, Mom, I already sent the check." Another clip from Rachel's graduation, where my dad is going on and on about how proud he is of her, and you can barely hear my voice in the background saying, "I think I got into that summer program, ignored, overlooked, forgotten." And then there were the photos, pictures where I was always slightly out of frame, where Dean was center stage. Rachel smiling perfectly and I was blurred in the background holding the camera or half cropped out entirely. I stitched them all together, layered them with a subtle score, let the visuals do the talking, and then just once I included a caption, "Not all weight is dead." Some of it carries the family when no one else can. That was it. No voiceover, no explanation, just the images, the music, and that one line. I exported the final version the night before the party, and then for the first time in years, I bought a proper suit. Not for them, for me. I wanted to walk into that house knowing exactly who I was, and I did. The party was at my parents' place, of course, catered fancy, full of people who knew my father as a pillar of the community. Rachel was there in a designer dress. Dean stood by the bar, already nursing a beer. My mom gave me the tight-lipped smile she always used when she wasn't sure how to feel. My dad, holding cord in the middle of the room, looked me over like I was just another guest, then nodded and said, "Glad you made it." I smiled. Wouldn't miss it. No one asked about the video. No one ever asks until they realized they should have. And when it finally played on a giant screen in the living room, lights dimmed, every guest's eyes on it. The silence that fell over that room was thicker than anything I'd felt before. You could have heard a pin drop. My dad's smile disappeared. My mom looked like she'd seen a ghost. Rachel's jaw clenched. "Dean." For once, he looked genuinely uncomfortable, and I just stood in the back of the room, hands in my pockets, watching it all. There's a moment that comes after the silence, after a truth is laid bare, and there's no comfortable lie left to cling to. When people reveal who they really are, the video ended. The room sat frozen. No one clapped. No one moved. It was Rachel who broke the silence first. "That wasn't really appropriate," she said, voice tight, carefully measured, like she was trying to hold on to her composure with both hands. This was supposed to be a celebration. I didn't respond to her directly. I looked at my father. He was still staring at the screen, at the final frame, that one line glowing white against the black background. "Not all weight is dead. Some of it carries the family when no one else can." The irony wasn't lost on me. How quickly their tone had shifted now that everyone else saw it. Not just me. Not just some angry son or black sheep with a chip on his shoulder. No, now the audience knew. His colleagues, his golf buddies, the family friends who'd always assumed I was the quiet one who didn't come around much. Truth changes things when you force people to look at it. Still, I kept my face calm collected. I wasn't about to blow everything I'd built by turning this into a fight. No, this was the beginning of something much more deliberate. So I smiled. You asked me to make a video that meant something. That's what I did. My mom was pale. She stepped forward like she wanted to say something, then stopped. Her hand fluttered at her chest. Zachary, you could have warned us. I think you've had enough warnings. I said, you just never listened. And then I left, walked right out cool as ice, leaving them to stew in that room full of their own reflections. Because this wasn't the revenge. Not yet. That was just the setup. The part where the walls start to close in and they finally realize they're not the ones holding the map. In the days that followed, I expected anyone to call, maybe to yell, maybe to apologize. I was ready for both. But the silence stretched on, which only told me one thing. They weren't sure how to respond. And when people don't know how to fight back, that's when they're most vulnerable. So I started planning, not out of spite, but out of clarity, because I had something they'd never had when dealing with me, the element of control, and I was going to use it. First step, gather the receipts, not just from 2009, but everything. I went back through my bank records, found the exact amounts I'd sent during that year, and the few that followed. I printed screenshots of every transfer, labeled them, dated them. I pulled emails my mother had sent thanking me privately for keeping them afloat. I saved voice messages where she'd whispered, "Please don't tell your father I asked." I wasn't planning to sue them or anything dramatic like that. But this wasn't about money, it was about accountability. I wanted to build a record so complete, so airtight, that if any of them ever tried to rewrite history again, I'd have more than just a well-edited video. I'd have evidence. Second step, identify pressure points. Every person in that family had a weakness, and I knew them all. Rachel cared about image more than oxygen. Her LinkedIn, her Instagram, her real estate branding, everything painted her as a self-made powerhouse who came from a loving, supportive family. Her followers saw brunches, luxury condos, expensive shoes. They didn't see the ugly truths. The way she'd manipulated my parents into co-signing her first mortgage while belittling me for needing help with a car loan. The way she'd badmouthed me to clients because my weird animation stuff was a little too alternative. Dean was quieter, more subtle, but he was desperate for validation. He was always trying to impress Dad, even now in his 30s. His biggest fear, looking small, weak, like he wasn't the guy Dad bragged about at the golf course. And he had secrets too, things I wasn't even supposed to know. And then there was my father, the man who had spent decades carefully curating his image as a respected professional and head of a tight-knit family. His whole reputation rested on that illusion. And if there's one thing my father couldn't stand, it was the idea of being seen as anything less than in control. But here's the thing. When you treat your own child like a disappointment long enough, eventually they stop protecting you. So I made a list not of things to destroy, just truths to reveal. Third step, gather allies. Now this part surprised even me. I didn't think I had any, but word spreads. People talk. That video had been shared more times than I expected. One of Rachel's former friends, a woman named Camilla, dimmed me a few days after the party. She said, "It was brave what you did. I've known your sister a long time. She's never given you the credit you deserve. We met for coffee." She shared stories, little things Rachel had said over the years, how she'd made fun of me to clients, how she referred to me as the family wild card like I was some unstable experiment. I thanked her, and we kept in touch. A few days later, I got a message from one of Dean's old friends from college. He told me about a project they'd worked on years ago, something Dean had taken credit for, but hadn't actually done. It wasn't illegal or anything, but it was enough to shake the image Dean had built. I kept collecting quietly, patiently. And as I did, something started happening. People started seeing me, really seeing me. Not the version of me my family had shaped in their stories, but the real one, the one who didn't need their approval anymore. I was invited to speak at a university panel about breaking into animation from unconventional backgrounds. I accepted. Afterward, a student came up to me and said, "I didn't think people like me could make it in this industry. Now I do." It nearly broke me because that was the point. That was why I'd held on so long, why I hadn't burned the bridge completely, because I kept hoping maybe someone in that family would see me the way this stranger did. But they hadn't, and they wouldn't. So I kept moving. Fourth step, give them rope. Now that I was no longer protecting them, I leaned into their stories. I let them talk. When people asked me how things were with my family, I said, "You should ask them." When people asked Rachel about the birthday party video, she fumbled, deflected. Said things like, "Zach's always been emotional. which of course just made people more curious. And the more curious people got, the more the cracks started to show. Rachel lost a client, a big one. Turns out that client had seen the video, asked questions, didn't like the way she answered. Image matters in her world, and she couldn't spin this one fast enough. Dean? He tried to go radio silent, but in a small enough network, silence is suspicious. He pulled out of a startup project he'd been working on. Word got around that he'd misrepresented his contributions on a previous venture. Nothing illegal, just disappointing. And my father? He started asking questions. First through my mom texts like, "Dad wants to talk. Can you give him a call?" Then directly, "Zach, enough with the drama. Let's sit down. Clear the air." I didn't respond because I knew exactly what that message meant. It didn't mean he wanted to apologize. It meant he wanted to regain control to clean the mess up before it spread any further. But it was already spreading and I wasn't done. Not yet. The final step of the setup was simple. Create the opportunity, which came ironically because of Rachel. She was throwing a charity gala in late September. Big venue, bigger guest list. I got an invite through Camila. Apparently Rachel didn't realize we'd become friends. I RSVP'd. Yes. When the night arrived, I wore a black suit, same calm smile, same quiet confidence, and tucked under my arm, a manila folder. The charity gala was every bit the glittering, pretentious spectacle I expected it to be. Rachel always had a flair for turning things into branding opportunities, and this night was no exception. Sleek banners with her logo, gold accents on everything from the centerpieces to the ice cubes, and a photographer stationed right by the entrance, snapping pictures of guests as they walked in like it was the Met Gala. The event was meant to raise money for a children's hospital noble cause, but Rachel wasn't doing it for the kids. She was doing it for the optics, for the social media posts, for the string of hashtags she'd no doubt prepared days in advance. I stepped into that ballroom with the manila folder tucked casually under my arm and a smile I couldn't quite suppress. I wasn't nervous. Not anymore. This wasn't about confrontation. This was about closure. Everything that was about to happen had been set in motion long ago. It just needed a gentle nudge. And tonight, I was that nudge. Camila met me near the back of the room just as she'd promised. She looked sharp and elegant in a navy dress, holding a glass of champagne and watching the crowd like a hawk. "She's over there," she murmured, tilting her head toward the podium. Just finished her speech. Everyone clapped. No one listened. I nodded. Perfect. I didn't approach Rachel right away. I waited, mingled, made small talk with a few people I recognized from online circles, producers, writers, and exec from a streaming service that had reached out to me last month. It was funny. These were the kinds of people my father would have fallen over himself to impress. The kind Rachel was always trying to attract. And they knew me not as the other sibling, not as the artsy one, but as Zach Hayden, the guy who'd built something on his own name. Eventually, Rachel spotted me. Her smile was the kind of thing you learn in expensive etiquette classes. Perfectly proportioned, utterly hollow. "Zach," she said, gliding toward me in heels that probably cost more than my flight. "You came." I matched her smile. "Of course, wouldn't miss it. You've always had a knack for throwing a party." She tilted her head, searching my face for sarcasm. "I'm glad." "Really? Look, I've been meaning to talk to you about the video. It caught us off guard, but maybe we should sit down, clear the air." There it was again. That phrase, clear the air. Code for, let's rewrite the story again. Only this time, keep your mouth shut. I didn't answer right away, just glanced around at the room at all the polished faces pretending to care about the cause while eyeing the open bar. And then I handed her the folder. "What's this?" she asked, brows narrowing. "Something for your records," I said. "Go ahead, open it." She frowned, but peeled it open. Her eyes moved across the first page and then froze. Her mouth parted slightly. A slow inhale, then another. The blood drained from her face. Inside were printouts of every payment I'd ever made to our parents. The mortgage checks, the bills, screenshots of emails, texts, voice message transcripts, and on top of it all, a signed letter from our father back when he was desperate enough to ask for help in writing. "Zach, we'll pay you back. You're not just helping us, you're saving us. I know we've been hard on you, but I promise we'll never forget this." I watched the emotions flicker through her, confusion, recognition, and finally panic. She glanced up at me, voice low and sharp. "Why are you showing me this?" "Because I want you to remember something I said. You've built this brand on the idea that you come from a strong, supportive family. You've used that narrative to attract clients, partners, sympathy, but it's fiction. You've spent years diminishing me, mocking me, rewriting our history so that you're always the shining one. But the truth, I leaned in just enough for only her to hear. The truth has teeth. She was breathing fast now. If this is some kind of threat, it's not, I said calmly. It's a favor. A chance for you to stop before I decide to go public. She went rigid. You wouldn't dare. I don't need to, I replied. The damage is already done. People saw that video. They're already asking questions. And if I decide to release this, I tap the folder. Your whole image collapses. I'm not here to ruin you, Rachel. I'm here to tell you that from now on, you don't get to speak for me. You don't get to use me. You don't get to erase me. She didn't respond, just stared, jaw clenched. I left her standing there and walked away. I didn't stop at Rachel, though. The next morning, I paid a quiet visit to Dean's office. Not a meeting, just a delivery. I left a small envelope with his receptionist addressed in my handwriting. Inside were a few friendly words and a copy of a message I'd received from his old business partner, the one who'd confided that Dean had taken credit for his work years ago. The envelope included a note. I've kept this private. I hope you'll do the same moving forward. You spent a long time acting like I was beneath you. Let's not pretend anymore. He never replied. And then there was my father. That conversation took place over coffee, not at my parents' house neutral ground, a small cafe on a quiet street. He showed up wearing that same guarded expression he always had when he knew he wasn't in control. He looked older, tired. Maybe it was the lighting. Maybe it was just finally seeing him as he was not how I wanted him to be. He sat across from me, cleared his throat, and said, "You made your point." No, I said I made my peace. Whether you understand it or not, that's up to you. He looked at me for a long time. You think I was a bad father. I think you were a proud one. And pride can make people blind. He nodded slowly. You know, when you were a kid, I didn't understand you. Still don't most days. That's not the problem, I said. The problem is, you never tried. Silence stretched between us. Then he said something I hadn't expected. Thank you for the mortgage for everything. I didn't say you're welcome. I didn't smile. I just nodded. That was enough. Weeks passed. The fallout wasn't explosive. It was quiet, slow, like erosion. Rachel's reputation took a subtle hit. Nothing dramatic. But enough that some clients stopped returning her calls. She posted less frequently. Dean stopped showing up at industry mixers. My mother texted now and then short messages. I responded politely but without warmth. They were still a family, still orbiting around one another. But I no longer orbited them. Instead, I focused on the life I'd built. My studio grew. I signed a deal to co-produce a new animated film. I hired Camilla as our community outreach lead. I bought a condo overlooking the river. Nothing flashy but mine. One afternoon, I walked into a bookstore and saw a hardcover collection of essays on animation and storytelling. My name was listed in the table of contents. I flipped to my piece and read the first line. Sometimes the best stories aren't about revenge. They're about remembering who you are when the people who raised you tried to make you forget. I bought 2 copies. One for myself and one I left and signed unwrapped on my parents' doorstep. No note. No explanation, they'd know. And as I walked away, I realized something. This was never about revenge. It was about release. I wasn't deadweight. I was the one who learned to carry himself when no one else would.